Okay, so here's the discussion on tennis, just to kind of point out some brief qualities here related to tennis. I'm also going to have a discussion board post question, just something short to coincide with this discussion. So here we have our energy breakdown. So just like we did with our other sports, again, the first number corresponds with the ATP PC system, the second number with the anaerobic glycolytic, and the third with the aerobic. So you see it's approximately a 7-20-10. So again, the ATP PC system dominates. There is some slightly more greater contribution from the glycolytic, and then the aerobic system again a small contribution to the general abilities, but also again recovery is going to play a role with that as well. Now here's some interesting things, and I got this from Yuri Verkhoshansky's Special Strength Training Manual. So some movement options. So when you're talking about like your agility and speed work, so obviously tennis takes place, in a relatively confined area. So, if you really want to look at your speed work directly from kind of some of the design of the court, and this doesn't necessarily have to take place on a tennis court. You could essentially, do these things just utilizing the distances. So, for instance, the advance to the net is essentially a 10-meter acceleration run, okay, to kind of replicate what they would have to do as far as advancing to the net. And you could work in deceleration with that as well, which would be beneficial. The long shuttle, as it's defined, is essentially going across the baseline, so 6 by 8 meters. So essentially, what you would do is do um, 6 shuttles back and forth along the sidelines. So I'll attempt to draw this. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but we'll give it a shot. So if here's your net, okay, so that's let's say that represents the net. I'm going to draw here. Okay, so most of us know what a tennis court looks like. Okay, so this is the half of a tennis court. Okay, so this would be the net would be right here. Okay, and then the rest of it you have all of your other respective lines. So the advance to the net would essentially be just an acceleration to the net. Okay, so it's about a 10-meter acceleration. The 6 by 8 on the baseline. Okay, so for that one, what you'd be looking at is basically going across here. So you could essentially run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then rest, and you can do a number of sets that way. That would be the 6 by 8. That would be the long shuttle. The short shuttle would basically be in here. Okay, so that would be they recommend doing 12. So you do 6 of the long, you do 12 of the short. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, that would be your short shuttle. So what that's doing is kind of teaching you to move in a very short space. And then the fan, so I'll show you what the fan is here. So the fan, if you kind of follow along, you would essentially be going here, here, here. This would be the fan, okay? So literally what you'd be doing, if you could see those red lines, you would do a little, actually here, and I'm forgetting, you go here and here as well, okay? So for the fan, you would hit up those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 directions. So that would be 1, and you'd repeat that 12 times, okay? So that would be, and they're approximately 4 meters. Those lines represent approximately a 4 meter distance. So again, it's just all, and if you really think about it, all this is just different lengths and directions to move with during tennis. So for some ideas as far as, again, this would kind of fall under the speed and agility kind of concept again. And you could also do this if you want it. You could also do this as far as to work on also on alactic capacity. So, and essentially, again, the only difference between doing it for speed work versus alactic capacity is the speed work, the volume would be a little lower, and your rest periods would be longer. If you were doing it for alactic capacity, you'd increase your volume slightly and shorten your rest intervals, obviously still looking to stay within working the ATP PC system. So again, another research finding. So again, when you're looking at how working on strength and a lot of these special qualities works into this, is you have to look at, smart programming with it. So what was found in regards to just running times is explosive strength correlated with improvement in speed and running times. And maximum strength didn't. However, so, and I have the however high bolded, the explosive strength correlated with max strength. So even though, again, and we've talked about this a little bit already, the maximum strength per se doesn't necessarily continue improvement in running times, particularly when you have really fast individuals and people with a higher training history. However, it does correlate with their explosive strength. So again, that's why, again, to some level, you have to be working on improving overall force development. Okay, and again, there's going to be times of the year where sometimes there's a little bit more importance related to that, and we're going to kind of see that as we kind of work and do some of the various group activities I'm trying to work on and plan on for you guys as we kind of move along with this, so that we can get some programming ideas out. Still, of course, in the meantime, be thinking of, again, your application questions, because again, I'm gonna be sharing some of my programs that I've done for various athletes, but you have to be able to see and understand how some of these things apply. So from an injury prevention perspective, this is what's going to be your discussion post assignment. So I want you to think about what are some injury issues related to tennis. Okay, so what would be some injury issues? What would be some things you might want to work on and be concerned about with a tennis player? Just give me like 2 points. 2 injury things, 2 injury prevention. I'm kind of keeping it like an open answer sort of thing. But what are your thoughts on injury prevention for tennis? So just two good, concise points on what you think would be injury issues or ways to prevent injuries with tennis. So here I'm going to kind of break down the tennis serve a little bit, because obviously this is a major part of tennis, and mechanically we have to kind of be aware. So we're going to be hearkening a little back to some functional anatomy, even a little bit of biomechanics here. So for the wind-up phase, what we're going to be looking at, so we're going to break each one of these phases down. I'm going to kind of give you the important points I want you to know as far as what we're looking at with each one of these phases. So for the wind-up phase, the shoulder is going to be abducted, extended, laterally rotated, and the trunk is going to be laterally flexed, rotated, and the legs rotated. So you're going to be basically starting from that position. For the cocking phase, you're going to have the scapula upwardly rotated and adducted. The shoulder is going to be abducted and externally rotated. You're going to have a very high activity of the rotator cuff during the cocking phase. The subscap is actually going to contract eccentrically. Okay, and we'll talk about if there's questions on that, we could talk about that dynamic a little bit in class. Okay, so the overall rotator cuff very active, particularly the subscap, and the reason why the subscap is going to be working eccentrically here is because you're basically loading that up, because obviously when you go into the acceleration phase, that muscle is going to be highly active. So it's sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, or a simple way of putting it, is it's kind of almost having that effect you get with a plyometric. You get that eccentric activity. So there you're getting that co-contraction. Also during the cocking phase, very important, the serratus anterior is going to be stabilizing the scapula, and the biceps activity is going to be very high. As we move into the acceleration phase, so now the shoulder is going to be medially rotating. The shoulder is going to adduct, the elbow is going to extend, and the trunk is going to move into flexion. Okay, which if you think about it is pretty much the opposite of what was going on from the wind up through the cocking phase. Okay, so here again, a lot of subscap activity. So now the subscap is going to be contracting concentrically off of that eccentric load up during the cocking phase. You're going to have the lat, the latissimus dorsi, to adduct the arm, and the pec as well. Okay, the bicep during this phase is actually going to be contracting eccentrically to control elbow extension and pronation. Okay, so that's some of the important muscle activity. So even thinking, so correlate some of this with the injury discussion, and you might want to listen to this particular slide over again maybe before you move on to the discussion board post. And then for the follow through, so if you think about what the goal of the follow through is, the goal of the follow through is to decelerate and stop the arm. Okay, and this is a big part of when we talk about the baseball pitch. It's a similar phase, because what you're trying to do is, you have the arm coming through at a very rapid rate of speed, and then it has to be able to stop. So the follow through phase, all the muscles now, the lat, the pec, the rotator cuff, the serratus, the biceps, are all going to be working eccentrically to slow down and stop the arm. Okay, so again, we talk about how different types of muscle contractions are important in order to kind of mitigate, because obviously if you're not getting good action of those muscles eccentrically through the follow through phase, that is going to predispose individuals to injury. So again, you might want to go back, listen to this particular part of the discussion again, because that could help you think about some of the things that you want for the injury discussion, because when we meet again, we'll likely get into some discussion about this depending upon the time frame of the class. So that actually concludes this discussion. So like I said, you have the discussion post on the injury. So again, just like two important points. Again, it could be anything from what would be areas you'd have to be concerned about injury-wise, some preventative or a preventative item that you might want to talk about, just something so that we have, and to get you thinking a little bit about that before we have an in-class discussion to kind of address this. And like I said, some of the things I just talked about here, just with the serve. Now, obviously, the serve isn't the only dynamic thing that happens during tennis, but is certainly something that could be an injury source if you have a muscle imbalance or there's a technique or biomechanics problem.